the Midwest's environment. Species around the world are already noticing this warmer change in temperature. In the Midwest, migratory birds are arriving sooner and plants are blooming sooner than they did 40 years ago. Compared to data from 1935 to 1945, a third of them are arriving 2 to 3 weeks earlier. For example, Canadian geese are arriving 29 days earlier, while butterfly weeds are arriving 18 days earlier. While some species, like the Canadian geese and the butterfly weed, are reacting to this change in temperature, others are not. To get a better understanding of this, in February I went and talked with Chris Sanford, the naturalist at the DC Everest Twin Oaks. My first question for you is, how would the Midwest environment, specifically Wisconsin's, in biodiversity be affected by warming temperatures?
There's two big things. Most of it is focused on having more earlier springs and having more intense dry periods during the summer. The biggest change that we've seen in Wisconsin is gradual temperature increases, about 2 degrees, give or take. That doesn't seem like much, but what that results in is much earlier spring, which means the snow is going to either thaw a lot sooner or will have a whole lot less. And on the other side of the spectrum, we are having more intense drought seasons in Wisconsin. Now, in Wisconsin, we do have some times where they do get dry. That's normal. The problem is it's happening more and it's happening for a lot longer. Why is the early thaw a bad thing? There's a lot of animals in Wisconsin, both plants and wildlife, that really depend on temperature in order for certain important parts of their ecology. For example, there are many migratory birds whose instincts are triggered more by temperature than time of day. Another big thing is plants. Certain plants and flowers will be triggered by temperature to start opening up their buds. The problem with that is a lot of the insects they depend on for pollination won't be back yet, which means we could be seeing a big decline that way.
Another aspect of warming temperatures is an increase in invasive species. Already, our forests are being devastated by them. For my state of Wisconsin, almost half of its total acreage is covered by trees, providing 16 million acres of forest for timber, recreation, wildlife habitat, and ecosystem services such as cleaning the air and water. Invasive species like the gypsy moth, the emerald ash borer, the hemlock woolly aldrich, and the beech bark completely wipe out hundreds of millions of acres of trees yearly. For instance, the gypsy moth infests 125 million acres of U.S. forests and costs us $10.6 million each year in efforts to suppress it.
As far as other animal species go, particularly animals such as porcupines, the forests that they depend on, which are mostly hemlock forests, they really rely on wet, damp soils. If those soils become more hotter and drier as time goes by, those forests, which are mostly in northern Wisconsin, they can tend to suffer and dry up, which takes away a porcupine's big food supply, which means now we have species that are being affected not just by porcupines, but by the animals that hunt them, such as fishers, a porcupine's only natural predator. They might have a field day at first, but eventually they'll run out of food to eat, which will result in their populations being lower, as well as animals that depend on the snow and the cover it provides to help them survive. Snowshoe hares, for example, their entire name and identity and design is based around a winter habitat. Their coat changes, which would normally change to white during the winter months, becomes useless when hiding from predators. Another thing could be also said for their big predators, which are weasels. Weasels during the winter time will also change their fur coats as well, and they depend on the snow not just to help blend in, but they also serve that as their winter homes. So all of a sudden now they're stuck out in the cold, and they are much more likely to be preyed upon. The thing that not a whole lot of people realize about any ecosystem, not just in Wisconsin, is that every living creature in it is tied to one another in even the smallest ways. And it's a lot more fragile than it would appear. You take away one particular prey animal, you have to think of, okay, what would happen to not only the food that that prey animal would eat, but what would also eat it in turn. One animal that's actually starting to benefit from climate change around here is actually the white-tailed deer. With snow thawing a lot earlier, that means that there's more stuff for them to browse and then to eat. That has two effects. The first is their own population may explode as a result, but the other effect is that the plants that they might eat and nibble on could be getting taken out earlier, which means less food for everything else to go on. Another big thing to think about is the fish population in Wisconsin. One of the things that we're known for is our trout fishing. Trout are extremely sensitive animals. They will actually only breed within a very specific temperature range.
To understand more how fish are being impacted by climate change, I went and talked with Frank Pratt, a retired fisheries biologist from the DNR. So, based on the warming that has already happened over the past 100 years, especially like with the temperatures warming by a couple degrees, how are these numbers significant to the natural ecosystems?
Okay, these numbers are, and that's a 2 degree change that's basically occurred since about 1980. So in the last 50 years or so, we've gained 2 degrees in average seasonal water temperature. This means that certain species that really thrive in cold water, species like brook trout, whitefish, cisco, lake trout, to an extent brown trout, northern pike, and some of the cool water fish like walleye are not faring as well as they used to, because they are encountering water temperatures, at least for part of the growing season, which is pretty much at their tolerance limits, if not lethal. So it's really restricted the range, the abundance, and the distribution of many of the cold water and cool water species already. And we're forecasting anywhere from a 2 to 9 degree change over the next century if climate change continues. So that is not good news for the cold water, cool water species. The nature of our fisheries has changed a lot in terms of species composition, and it's probably not going to switch back to what it was. When I first came to Wisconsin in 1974, the premier game fish species here were, particularly in northern Wisconsin, was the walleye. That's what most anglers wanted. And a large number of our lakes and our streams, they were the dominant predator species. That's completely changed. Walleye are, I hesitate to say, on their way out, because there are going to be a relatively small number of waters, but a few waters where they're probably going to hang on. But their abundance has really crashed under climate change. And I don't think they're coming back. On the other hand, the sunfish, which would include the black bass, largemouth and smallmouth, and a lot of our favorite panfish species like bluegill, pumpkin seed, black crappie, they are thriving. They're absolutely thriving. A longer growing season benefits them. Warmer water temperatures benefit them. More eutrophic waters with more weeds, more phytoplankton, more productivity benefit them. We're probably looking at the heyday of bass and panfish fishing in Wisconsin. So basically what we see to this date has been a shift away from the cold water, cool water species to those species that are considered to be purely warm water species. On the land, environmental conditions and atmospheric carbon conditions. For example, one of the things that's going on right now due to climate change is our patterns of precipitation have completely, totally changed here in northern Wisconsin. We're getting about the same amount of precipitation on an annual basis, but a lot less is coming as snow melt right now. A lot more is coming as summer rain. And the most problematical part of that is these are summer rains that are coming in these gigantic superstorms, 10, 11 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And our watersheds are just not built to withstand that type of deluge. And then if you add on top of that a lot of agriculture, a lot of impervious surfaces, a lot of human development, you have tremendous amounts of soil erosion and runoff that go with that. And then you have nutrient problems that go along with that. And you've got one problem aggravating the other.
Additionally to warmer water temperatures, our lakes and rivers and the aquatic species that live in them are being affected by a reduction in ice coverage. Coverage regulates the water's temperature, the light penetration, and the dissolved oxygen levels, and other ecological perimeters that govern the growth and the reproduction of species and interspecies relationships. In addition to this, winds are making contact with lake waters, which are disturbing fish nesting sites and impacting the ways lakes stratify. So as we can see, the Midwest ecosystems have changed. We are seeing a dramatic shift between cold weather to warm weather species. And as the winter is so essential into the Midwest, the change is exceptional. But that's just a very narrow view of how significant our environment is to the Midwest. So let's change it up. Let's change from environment to species to something else. Environment to business.